after having reached everything that I thought would make me happy, that was miserable. And I didn't know why. Of course, now I can tell you is that I was living outside of myself. I had abandoned myself in some ways. I thought that science and especially physics could explain everything. I thought I was a machine and I thought I should be happy. And I wasn't. One night, I woke up trying to go back to sleep as you would normally do. A few minutes into it, I feel this energy rushing out of my chest,
Hmm.
white, scintillating. It was love, but a love so powerful. I never had any experience like that. And even more incredible, I was the source of this energy because this energy had my consciousness in it.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. And speaking of transmissions, some, at least from my perspective, are true brain melters. They require you to just clench your neurons and hold on. And this is absolutely one of them. I'm still processing this one. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and listen to a few sections of this one to really grok them, because Federico Faggin is just a real genius. He invented the microprocessor. He had a long, incredibly successful career in tech, but his current passion, the philosophy of consciousness, has also yielded truly impressive results. If you've heard any of our mind melds with Bernardo Kastrup or Dr. Donald Hoffman, you kind of know what you're in for here. Of course, there are important differences between the three, but Federico intellectually is right up there with these gentlemen. And on that note, what is Federico proposing? I don't want to get too heavy-handed with the exposition here, but I will say that, as you saw in the introduction, after a sort of unexpected mystical experience, after that experience, he spent years experimenting with his consciousness and learning everything he could about the philosophy of mind, and eventually he went as far as working with a physicist to flesh out the technicals of his own theory. And as you'd expect from an idealist philosopher, Federico believes consciousness is primary, that consciousness is not produced by the brain, and that human beings sort of exist as a bridge between two worlds. Our bodies are, of course, in the classical realm, the macro realm of space and time, but our truer self, our deeper self, our consciousness exists in the quantum realm as a field that's outside of space and time. And I'm going to stop there. This is really just scratching the surface. I really want to stress that this isn't just some loose skeet of ideas. This is rigorous stuff, which of course we will get to in this very mind meld. And if you want to initiate yourself fully into his theory, definitely check out his book, Irreducible. He's also the author of his memoir, Silicon. Links for said books, along with everything else for Federico Faggin, are in the description. Same for Third Eye Drops. And on the note of this channel, my friends, we are on the brink of a big milestone, 100,000 subs. Help us get there by subscribing yourself if you haven't, and also just tickle the algorithm in all ways with a like, a sub, like I said, a comment, a share. All of it is truly helpful. And if this topic tickles your wonder whiskers, you know, the philosophy of consciousness, idealist philosophy, check out our back catalog. We've got hundreds of mind melds. Several of them are on this topic with thinkers like Don Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup. Some of those are up on YouTube. Some are only in our back catalog. So do subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to riff more, not only on these topics, but everything we explore on this channel, join up over at patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. We've got a patron-only Discord server. We do monthly Zoom hangs. We've got a book club. And depending on your pledge level, you can also get rewards like stickers, pins, shirts, and more. But you must go to patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. Of course, I would love to riff with you there. But speaking of riffing, let's do so with the brilliant Federico Faggin. First, let's get the greetings out of the way before I just launch into it, because I could just go. I've been excited for this conversation, but thank you for being on the show. I'm very, very excited.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
So like I was just starting to say, you know, you were hugely successful in technology, inventor of the microprocessor, and you know, you ostensibly have everything you should need to be happy. Yet you hit this period of soul searching, of uncertainty. And I don't recall which happens first. What was it, your sort of mystical experience, or was it this sort of nebulous sense of I don't know, soul searching and dissatisfaction?
Yeah, it was the deep dissatisfaction after having reached everything that I thought would make me happy, and I was miserable, and I didn't know why. Of course, now I can tell you is that because I was living outside of myself, I had abandoned myself in some
Mm,
ways, but I didn't know that then, and I had embraced the physicalist idea of the world. I thought that science and especially physics could explain everything, and I thought I was a machine, and I thought that I should be happy, and I wasn't.
right.
So it was in this climate. And at that time, I was studying neural networks and was studying neuroscience, biology. Was trying to understand how the brain works and see if we could understand more about neural networks, especially the biological ones. And I realized that there was no mention even of consciousness, no mention that electrical signals in the brain and biochemical signals in the brain do not equate with feeling and sensations, which is how we know. So I discover the what was later called the hard problem of consciousness by by Chalmers.
Chalmers, yeah.
Yes, David Chalmers. He wrote a book in '95 that my sort of discovery, quote unquote, was in the late '80s, and I was clearly stunned that I couldn't think of any way because I was as an engineer I was also trying to figure out, can I make a conscious computer? Then how, what could I do to make a conscious computer? If consciousness is a property of an informational system and the brain is an informational system, then I should be able to make a conscious computer. So after a couple of years of figuring out, there was no way, no, there was nothing in physics that allows you to convert electrical signals, whatever signals you want, any
Hmm.
information, into sensations and feelings. So, and I was very unhappy, and I was, in a way, asking for help. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to understand what was going on, and it was this climate that I, right now, I could interpret as me praying in a way, wanting to understand. I wanted to understand, not to do something with it other than understanding what's going
Yeah.
on here.
I'm sorry, I was going to say I'm laughing because I know that feeling so well, that just sort of existential longing to understand the bigger picture, the bigger why, the what we're doing here, the why, what even is this? Why, what is any of this? What is the point? And
Yes,
obviously life just, most people don't even get to ask that question. And you have to have a certain, I mean, ask the question, sure, but seriously have the time, the resources, the intellect to think about it and do something about it, and follow up on that sense of sort of, existential longing. um but then you have this really powerful mystical experience that I was alluding to before, and that seems like that was the catalyst for you, from my reading of your book, that really led to taking this more seriously. So please share that story.
yeah. So it was at least 2 or 3 years that I was thinking about this consciousness and so on. I had realized sometimes earlier, uh, 4 or 5 years earlier, that I was pretending to be happy while I was not, and so
Mm,
it was. Uh, Probably a year or two before what I call the awakening experience, that I decided that I want to know. I don't want to pretend anymore, because running a company, you had to be excited, have everything up. I mean, uh, you know. Uh, Optimistic and everything is great, and I was dying inside, and I didn't know why. And so So I wanted to know. And in this climate, in 1990, during a holiday vacation with my family up in Tahoe, one night I woke up, was thirsty. I went to get a glass of water, and I went to bed, just thinking nothing, just trying to go back to sleep as you would normally do. And right, few minutes into it, I feel this energy. It almost felt like it was making a noise, even rushing out of my chest.
Hmm.
But it was a physical
Wow.
energy. It was not an idea. It was not a thought. It was energy coming out of my chest, white, scintillating. It was, if it was love, but a love so powerful. I never had any experience like that. And even more incredible, I was the source of this energy, because this energy had my consciousness in it. And my body was becoming hot, and and vibrating, sort of going with this scintillating lights, almost. And together with this love, there was peace and joy. But joy and love I had felt before, I could recognize. But peace, it was unbelievable. This is home, this is me. So it was that kind of peace, not the peace of, a peace meaning, this is me, I'm home, finally meeting myself in a way. And then this energy exploded, expanded rapidly into filling all the space, same white scintillating light. And a thought forms in my mind, and before I can verbalize, it's clear that this is the stuff of which everything is made. And I sort of verbally said to myself, but I also realized that the thought was before the words. So there was
Hmm.
an understanding that was pre-verbal, pre-mental verbal, so that from that experience I could see that there was a separation between the thinking as fundamental things, feeling, and the verbalization that happens in the brain. And and then and then this energy that had expanded had my consciousness in it, so I was observing myself. So I was the observer and the observed. I felt like the
Yeah. Yeah.
world observing itself with my point of view, because the only thing that's remained the same was my point of view, my identity, what I call now my identity. And that identity is the same that I had when I was a young kid, right? And through my life, I've always recognized me as that sense of me. So that sense of me had no change whatsoever, but everything else, my relationship with the world, with the universe, was completely different now. All of a sudden, instead of feeling separate from the universe, I was integral. I was the universe in a way, observing itself with my point of view. So, as you can imagine,
So
this
interesting.
this change completely. Just 180 degrees, the sense that I had about who I am, what the universe is, and the fact that physically, emotionally, mentally, and now for the first time spiritually, there was unity in my experience. So, I never felt anything like that. There was everything was going with it. Was in harmoniously with it.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
me, that
I
that 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 was that was a sea change for me, because I realized
Mhm.
also, now I can say it now, the sense of truth, that what I was seeing was reality,
Yeah.
deeper than anything that I study in books, or even deeper than a theorem that you prove. Because even a theorem that you prove, you have
Yes.
to start with the truth of postulates, which are taken as truth, because you cannot prove the postulates. So this was, the capacity of consciousness of self to know directly its, its own existence, its own being. So uh,
Yeah. Yeah. I have so many questions about this, and that I want to ask you. But first, if you'll allow me to riff and throw something at you, This seems to me to be a great example of something that I really struggled to explain. I made a video a while back about the Plato's cave allegory. And
Hmm.
obviously tied up in that allegory, I'm sure you're familiar with this epistemological division that Plato slash Socrates lays out of the divided line of sort of
Yeah,
different grades of knowing. And at the
yeah,
very top is noesis,
yeah.
this kind of knowing that is above dianoia or discursive or logic or anything that you can capture in any kind of symbol system. And I was just looking and looking for the best definitions of noesis I could find. And from my memory, what I ended up going with is that you really can't explain it because you have to have a direct experience, a direct knowing of something that is of a sort of different epistemological order of
Yes.
everyday experience. It's like you become one with the knowledge of something in a way that you can't explain or put into words or into a theory or into even what art or math or anything, because you become one with this sort of epiphany.
Yeah, you become what you experience. Yeah, you become what you experience. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this seems like you had a noesis. Yeah, go ahead. Go
And
ahead, sorry.
unless you experience it, you cannot, like you say, you cannot understand it. I mean, if someone would have told me that you can experience like this, I would have said, you're crazy. Forget it. I mean, this is impossible. And in fact, if you tell to scientists these things, how can you know? How do you? Are you crazy to think that you can
Yeah.
know directly? You can only know, through math and through theorem proving and what have you. No, you can actually know, but the kind of knowing that you have is not the same knowing that you have using symbols. It goes beyond symbols. It goes
Yeah.
directly to the heart of what you know. And so it gives you a sense that there is a deeper reality. There is the meaning, the reality of meaning, not the reality of symbols, but the reality of the deepest meaning that you access directly. And that is really what
Yeah.
makes it such. And then you had to actually effort to transfer that into any symbolic form that can be understood. And in fact, 30, what, 35, 34 years ago, I can actually, you know, have a theory that shows that this is what quantum physics has been trying to tell us all along.
Mm.
that quantum physics, the quantum state that cannot be reproduced, you know now I can say, hey, if you accept the consciousness is fundamental, then quantum physics must have this characteristic, that there is a quantum state that can only be known from the inside, from within, not from without. And that's exactly what quantum
Yeah.
physics is saying.
Yeah, I want to get more into this and into your theory in general, and this idea that this quantum reality seems to have this innate internality that you talk about. But before we go there, just on a personal level, in the wake of this experience, what do you do with it? How do you make sense of it? And also, how did your understanding of that experience evolve over time? Like, how are you thinking about it when it first happened to you versus how do you think about that experience now?
Well, when it first happened to me, it was like a bolt on a sky that had
Mm,
no rhyme or reason to bolt. It was it was just, I was stunned. I was stunned. But I also recognized that uh, I was not what I had thought, just because of this direct knowing. I never doubted the validity of my experience. That was so strong, so powerful, that I say,
mhm.
okay, now I need to explore this. I cannot, I cannot let it go. No, there was never a thought, let me go to the psychiatrist and ask him, ask him how to explain it to me. No, 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 no. That was obvious to me that this experience was clearly telling me the world is not what you thought, and now
Yeah.
find out, essentially. And so it
Mm,
took me to a ride of that took about 20 years, of exploration of consciousness through all kinds of schools of thought, school of experience, different kinds of meditation, and so on. And it was only after 20 years in which I dedicated between 30 and 40% of my time. At that time, I was running, during that period, I ran two companies. I was CEO of two companies. And so, I was very busy, but my deepest priority was my major priority was my research, and I dedicated pretty much all of my spare time and some and more. And so it was only after 20 years of having a lot of other extraordinary experiences, because this was not the only one. This opened the Pandora's box. And then through the
Mm.
various schools of thoughts and meditations and so on, exercises, and I ended up having probably a couple of hundred more, not in not in
Wow.
those 20 years, but between then and now, about a couple hundreds of what I would call extraordinary experiences of consciousness that gave me different kinds of, for example, I found my consciousness as a point at the base of my sternum, just one point of light. I was that point of light.
Mm.
That's it. That was me.
Mm.
Or I was everywhere in the trees. In this case, not with this light, scintillating light. No, but I was in all the physical universe, and that I could observe in the trees, in the houses in front of me, in the grass, and within myself. So I was everywhere. Or I had an experience where there was a field of consciousness and no one watching. No one. There was just a field of consciousness. There was no
Mm.
self yet, and that I attribute that to
Mm.
1 week old, 2 weeks old, for some of the way in which that experience told me that. But and then I had out of body experiences. So I'm not even in the body. I'm out, not in and
Mm.
out, but also completely out of the body. So all those experiences gave me the sense of the mobility of consciousness, and the fact that we are just not the body. And now with all those experiences, the idea that consciousness must be a phenomenon of the brain, is crazy. It's insane. But obviously, I understand that the people that don't have those experiences, like earlier, for me, I thought that my consciousness was in the brain. Now, for example, I feel
Yeah.
my consciousness in my body, not just in my head. But
Mm.
before these experiences, I was just in my head, because as you study physics, and you become very rational. You work on your head, and basically you think that the consciousness is in the brain. But now I feel my consciousness everywhere in my body, normally,
Mm.
by normal experience. So through all this work, I got to a place where it was very clear that consciousness must be fundamental. It must exist from the very beginning of the universe. And with that, free will, because my sense of consciousness was that we know what we want. So if we know what we want, consciousness allows us to also direct our our own self-knowing, our own experience of ourselves. And so those that kind of idea was about 20 years after this experience. So by 2010, 2028, 2008, 2009, around that time, it was clear to me that this is how it's got to work. And I matured the desire to then connect with physics, because I understand physics. It was very clear that quantum physics had a lot to do with this, and that there had been even attempts by the early fathers of quantum physics to explain the collapse of
Mm-hmm.
the wave function as a, an observer effect, the consciousness of the observer,
Yeah.
collapsing the wave function. But that theory was then discredited. So it was clear that there was a lot of connection that needed to be understood. And so I decided to leave everything. I sold my last company. I got out of all the boards that I was in. I basically decided to dedicate myself 100% of my time to study this phenomenon and trying to connect spirituality, meaning our interiority, with the exteriority. The fact that Physics only study things in the lab and doesn't give any value of reality to what we feel. And and after those 20 years, that didn't make any sense. And I realized that
Hmm.
the meaning of information was completely missing from physics, and it was the missing ingredient.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely want to get into that. And I think before I go there, I've got to put myself in the place of the audience and honestly myself, because I think what I just heard and what the audience just heard is what everybody wants, right? They want this soul searching, this nebulous sense of meaninglessness and just listlessness that we all have. They want it to culminate in an experience like that. They want to find reliable methods to achieve these states of consciousness where they truly experience that they are not their bodies, that they're not limited to their physiology, that they can
Yeah.
go out of their body, that they can feel like they're one with you, like a more universal consciousness, or um any number of these things that you described. So I wonder, in your exploration of various techniques, what's the most reliable methods you've found, and what like really sticks with you, and do you now have a practice to try to achieve those states regularly?
No, frankly, my attitude has always been, first of all, most of my experiences have been spontaneous, meaning
Hmm.
they follow my search for meaning, my search to understand what's going on. So, in some ways, it's almost like a part of me. It might be my vaster self, because I believe that I am a vaster self than what I initially thought, the ego self that thinks to be the body. That I'm more than that, and that part of me that is more than the ego, the part that believes to be the body, then is helping me. It responds to my need to understand. And so I have extraordinary experiences because that's I'm asking. I'm asking for them.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
trying to force anything. Just asking, and then they may or may not come. If they come, wonderful. And so rarely, for example, I had 3 or 4 out of body experiences. Then I wanted to, and then I didn't have any more. So I actually tried to have some. I went to the Monroe Institute. Took those
Yeah.
courses and so on. I was never able to have them through
Hmm.
trying. You see, and so I kind of
Interesting.
gave up. I said that you know let me continue with my search just by 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 asking and accepting what comes. And in the last probably 8 years, most of my extraordinary experience of consciousness come through holotropic breath work. So I've been using
Hmm. Yeah.
that as pretty much the only technique, and which is a very simple. But I do it in a private setting, not in a group. Where most of the time those are done in a group. I do it in a private setting, and pretty much almost 100% of the time, maybe 98% of the time, I have an extraordinary experience of consciousness, generally responding to issues that I'm trying to work out, personal
Hmm.
issues that I'm trying to work out, or things that I want to know. And often, there are traumas, the traumas that happen in some other life, certainly not the current life, that have to work themselves out, and then I enter into a very expanded state after that. And I guess
Hmm.
some of the meaning of some of the issues that trauma had caused. Occasionally, the trauma releases also muscle tensions that I didn't know that I had in my body, especially my ability to open up my chest. Clearly, most of the trauma were in my heart, so I was protecting my heart by not
Hmm.
allowing the chest to open completely, and so things of that sort. That's so for me. I'm not trying to go there just to go there. I mean, and also writing books for me the best meditation possible, because when I write
Mm,
books I enter into a very private and intimate state, and and I
yeah.
get lots of ideas, lots of way to connect thoughts and issues that otherwise I wouldn't have a chance to find out. So this works for me. I presume that different people will probably have to find different methods, but what has worked for me so far is this, and now I have reached a certain, complete. I feel at peace, in that sense where before I was never here and now. I was always thinking where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do, and I was not I was not in my body in a sense. I was out of my mind instead of being in my mind and just being where I was. So that's a big difference, and that was also part of my unhappiness, was that I didn't have a
Hmm.
sense of who I was. I was simply
Mm,
in a sense a machine working.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about writing, because I was just speaking to. Do you by chance know Dr. Gregory Shaw? He's a scholar of Neoplatonism. Um,
no, no,
wrote a book on. He has a book called Theurgy and the Soul, about mostly about Iamblichus, the
yeah,
Neoplatonic philosopher Iamblichus. Um, but yeah, he said something very similar. He had a very rigorous yoga background and meditation background, and he said these days writing is what really gets him into the most
hmm, yeah,
sort of, I don't know about like mystical state necessarily, but a state of consciousness that is expanded and altered
yeah,
in a way that I think a lot of people underestimate. And I mean, it's very true about the breath as well. I've not done exactly holotropic breath work, but I did have a breath work practice for a long time. And yeah, I don't know what it is, but it certainly gets you outside of that sort of self-referential default mode
yeah,
network, thinking about the small self state of consciousness. And yeah, it really does bring up some interesting analogs to these both Indian ideas and Greek ideas about what the breath is, right? Because like,
yeah,
for the Greeks, pneuma is not just the corporeal breath, it's like the cosmic breath of
yeah,
life that permeates everything and gives life to everything. And of course, this idea, and it's similar to what you said about your chest as well, right? Like, well, why would opening your physical chest have some kind of metaphorical, symbolic, or psycho-spiritual impact on what we think of as the heart in a more philosophical way? And it's like they're these things are related in a non-physical way somehow. Um, and I think that might dovetail kind of nicely into your larger theory, which is, I mean, it does many things, but one of the things it does is it unifies these things that we perceive to be dualistic,
yeah,
physical or psychological, metaphorical or literal. Um, so first, why don't we start with some just procedural definitions that are like the building blocks of all of these things you talk about? And where better to start than consciousness? How do you like to define consciousness? And is it different than the sort of run of the mill definition that most people have in their heads?
yeah. Well, I have to start from where I have in the place where I have reached a sense of completion of a
Hmm.
possible theory of consciousness, where basically I start with the properties, the capacities of one. One is the
Yeah.
totality of what exists. As a physicist, you have to start from the most fundamental aspect of reality, and that is the fact
Hmm.
that already quantum physics is saying that the universe is holistic and dynamic. Dynamic means that it's never the same moment after moment. It keeps on changing. And holistic means that it's not made of separable parts. So the universe is not, there are no parts. The fields that exist, for example, are the ontological aspects of the universe, but the fields all exist in superposition in some sort of form in which they
Yeah.
communicate with each other, but they are all they are all embedded parts of one, in a sense, parts whole of one. And so starting with that, given that science only, especially physics, only only understands the outer reality, the reality that you can measure in space and time. And for most physicists, quantum physics is simply a mathematical theory that allows you
Mm.
to do the best possible work in predicting what you can measure in space and time. Most physicists don't give any reality to an interiority of nature. And of course, after my experiences, that is, to me, that is, if anything, more important, but not completely all there is. It's because there is also matter, but matter is a derivative of the fields. In fact, even physicists are saying that an electron, for example, is a state of the field of electrons, but a state that cannot be
Hmm.
separable, cannot be separated from the field. So it's really an integral part of the field, just like a wave of the sea cannot be separated from the sea. So an electron is not an object as we had imagined for the longest time, as a separate thing. It's not an object, it's a state of the field. Like a wave is a state of the sea, a wave of the sea, this state of the sea. And so if you start there, then you see that there is that the interiority, which is in the field, and the exteriority, which is in the states of the field, they are connected. They're not separable. So this is a monistic theory, and this monistic theory says that then if there is meaning, the meaning cannot be in the outer states of the field. It has to be within the field. So I added one third covenant to this idea. And I call one the universe, instead of saying the universe like physicists call it, like all that exists for the physicists is the measurable universe. I say
Right.
one, the totality of what exists, is dynamic, holistic, and wants to know itself. Wanting to know itself starts from the fact that the deepest longing that we feel also is to know who we are, to know ourselves, to know the others, to know the universe, what's going on. And science is about knowing too. So even science, is is the one of the deepest aspects of human being. But science now only is concerned, or primarily is concerned, with the outer world and not with the inner world. And certainly consciousness is defined typically by scientists today as an epiphenomenon of the brain, as opposed to be a real
Hmm.
phenomenon.
Hmm.
It's not even given reality to it, not to speak of free will, which to me is fundamental at the level of the fields, which is negative by most physicists as a property of the universe. So when I say one wants to know itself, then I'm expressing the capacity of one to direct his own self-knowing. So the will, there is a will there that becomes free will for the fields, which are emanation of one. And there is the desire to know itself that must imply that there is the capacity to know itself. So consciousness is simply defined as the capacity of one to know itself. That has to be
Mm.
there from the very
Hmm.
beginning. How else is one knowing,
Yes.
if not being conscious? So consciousness must
Yes.
be a fundamental property of nature, and one must have the capacity to direct its own self-knowing.
Yes.
And that's
Beautiful.
and that
Beautiful.
and
Uh,
that's so I start there. Now when you start there, then
yeah.
that's a postulate. Now if you have a
Yes.
postulate, you don't question you don't question anymore whether consciousness exists or not. Why is this postulate useful? because he allows you to explain why quantum physics has the crazy property that it has that nobody has been able to understand so far. Not only that, but you also need classical physics, because classical physics
Right.
can operate as the memory of the experience of one, as well as the capacity of the fields to communicate with each other what they feel inside that cannot be given directly to the other person, to the other fields.
Yeah.
In other words, what I feel within me, I'm the only one to feel that. And I cannot, the love that I feel for my son, for example, I cannot give it to him as what I feel in. I have to translate that love into symbols that are shareable. And those are all
Yeah.
properties of quantum systems. They are not properties of the classical world. In fact, you need classical symbols in order to share what you feel. But what you feel is much deeper than what you can share, because the symbols that you
Hmm.
use can be expressed or can be represented numerically, where what you feel cannot be expressed numerically, goes beyond numbers,
Yeah.
beyond the power of numbers to represent. The best structure that can represent qualia, the sensations and feelings, is a
Hmm. Hmm.
pure quantum state. But a pure quantum state require an n-dimensional space to be described. Not only
Yes.
that, but the dimensions must be complex numbers. And complex numbers are not
Yeah.
real numbers. Complex numbers, there is no number that multiplied by itself gives you -1. And so the imaginary number, that is the second part of the complex number. The complex number has a real part and an imaginary part. The imaginary part is a real number multiplied by square root of -1. Well, -1, square root of -1 is not a number. It's called
Yeah.
imaginary number. It has properties that can actually be used to, um, uh, you know, to operationally treat it as if it were a number, but it's not a real number.
Right.
And so
Right.
the fact that you need those kind of numbers, and the fact that those kind of numbers represent probability amplitudes within quantum physics,
Yes.
they do not represent uh, you know, position, momentum. They don't represent a physical variable. They represent
Right.
probabilities. In order to, when you make a
Yes.
measurement, you have to transform that quantum state through an operator, which is the proper operator for that type of uh, physical variable that you want. For example, if you want to measure the position of an electron, well, after you make an experiment, you had to transform the state of the field through an operator that transforms the state of the field into a probability distribution now of where you might find the electron. And you might find the electron
Yeah.
in a large volume of space, instead of finding in, you always find them in one position, but the probability is over
Right.
a very large, space. And so now all of a sudden you have a complete different way to imagine a physical variables, because an electron, also being a state of a field, is not a little ball, and it does not exist, in between what you
Yeah.
call the emission of the electron and the detection of the electron, the measurement. You
Hmm.
cannot think of the electron as something that moves from the gun that produces it into
Right.
the detector that detects it, because if you
Right. That would
think
be
that way,
classical.
it
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
to, for example, one electron would have to go through both slits of a double slit
Yes.
screen that is in front of the detector. So this cannot be done. You
Let's
cannot think in that
let's
in those
let's
terms.
let's zoom out a little bit. Just I'm following you, but if the audience is new to your theories, I just want to make sure we have the pieces in place to understand this broadly. And I think
Yes.
one of these key ideas is that, so first, consciousness is primary. It is the sort of unified base of reality, that everything emerges from. And there's a quote in Silicon that's a really great quote. I think it's from Heisenberg, that essentially quantum fields are almost like these platonic forms that reality is emanating out of, and that quantum fields, to your point, can appear to have, discrete, or like discrete different particles can seem to exist, but really all we're doing is we're making a measurement somewhere in space time that appears to be a particle, but really that particle does not exist. What exists
Yeah.
is the field, even though that field is, I guess, an outside of space and time and outside of classical physics altogether, yet it somehow not just coexists with it, but is more primary to reality than what reality appears to us to be. So, one place that I think I struggle with fully putting the pieces together, and I understand why it is convenient for the theory, but what I don't understand it fully is how you conceive of the relationship between interiority, my like the psyche, and the quantum realm. Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So the interiority is, first of all, we are not the body. So let's start there. We are not the body. We are so used to think that we are the body. And when I say we, I
Yeah.
mean our consciousness, our free will, what matters to us, what remains after the body dies, i- is not the body. Okay, we are a field that is conscious and has free will. So we are a field that is potentially infinite and has free will and is conscious. That controls the body. The field controls the body. The body is like an instrument, like a drone that is controlled by this field.
Hmm.
And the field is observes the body, observes the body. The body observes the outer world in space and time. So the body exists in space time, but also
Hmm.
is connected to the fields because space-time and matter are really states of fields. Okay, so then the so and by the way, the, for the body to be able to communicate with this field, the body must be quantum and classical, because the field could not communicate directly to classical symbols, to classical objects. Classical objects are made of combinations of atoms that are
Hmm.
disorderly, so it when you have a bunch of atoms that combine, generally large number of atoms that combine, those objects, then they become objects in space and time. They behave deterministically. They follow the rules of classical physics, and the rules of classical physics are deterministic. Computers are
Right.
deterministic because the bit resides in a large clump of atoms and molecules. It is a property supported uh, by deterministic physical structures. The bit, on the other hand, is an intellectual abstract concept that can exist as long as the circuits of the computer, for example, can reliably recognize states or ranges of states of these
Hmm.
objects. For example,
Yeah.
so the bit, for example, uh, zero is a voltage level in a node of a circuit between 0 and zero point 0.2 volts, for example, and then one would be in the same node a voltage between zero point 0.6 and 1 volt, for example. Okay, so and then there is a gap where you should not have a signal, and so you cannot recognize that signal. Now you have a signal that moves from zero to 1 volt, 0 volt to 1 volt.
Yes.
It will be recognized as zero up until it goes to point two, and then nothing, and then it will recognize as one when it goes above point 0.6 reliably. In the gap, some circuits may recognize it as a zero, or some other circuits as a one, but that gap is forbidden. You never look there inside the computer.
Hmm.
You look only in the regions where the signals is reliably zero or one in the way you have defined it.
Yeah.
That's it. So it's an intellectual thing that we have imposed on the matter of which the computer is made. So it does not have an existence per se. But we have made these circuits in a way that they can reliably recognize what we call zero and what we call one. Um, where in the quantum physics, the quantum bits, which are an extension of the bit, are actually much more sophisticated structures because they correspond to any a state of the quantum bit it can be visualized as a single point, any single point on the surface of a sphere, of a unitary sphere. That would be, which is a direction in a 3D space. Every point on the surface of the sphere is a possible state of a quantum bit. So a quantum bit
Yeah.
as infinity could represent an infinity of state, but one of those infinity of states, where a bit can only represent one of two possible states. And so there is a very different difference between the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So we were I was going to say we were talking about the relationship between the quantum realm and interiority,
yeah,
and I'm not sure if we fully connected those two
yes, I have
ideas, or if
not,
we did,
because
it flew right
no,
past me.
because I
Okay.
tend to go into the details, and therefore I go by the tangent.
Yes. Yes.
So
That no, I fully understand. I fully
forgive
understand.
me,
I
forgive
fully
me.
understand.
So yeah, so now the interiority then of the field. So the interiority of the field
Hmm.
now can be represented mathematically as a pure quantum state of the field. The pure quantum state of the field, which is this vector in n-dimensional
Hmm.
space with with complex dimensions. So that's the definition of the quantum state of the field. But the
So can I ask
representation,
you a question?
yeah,
When you think about, so some people may not have this mathematical language, when they hear n-dimensional space, they're like, what does that mean? When you think about these things, do you see something in your mind? Do you see like do you think of like a geometric, like a three-dimensional lattice pattern, or what do you think of
yeah.
when you think of a quantum
I,
field?
frankly, it is impossible. It is impossible to imagine even a four-dimensional space. You can make you can represent in three-dimensional space. You can represent a projection of four-dimensional space
Yeah.
in three-dimensional space, and you have for example, a cube becomes a very
Yes.
strange object. Okay, in three dimension.
Yeah, like a hypercube that's moving. Yeah.
That's right. So, and you can imagine that if you have n 1 billion dimensions, you have
Right.
absolutely no ideas. If you cannot even imagine a 4D, um, in order to represent the state of an electron, you require thousands of quantum bits that are entangled. So it's an unbelievable
Yeah.
complexity. You see, we are at a loss with our imagination to represent more than spatial dimension. But you can think in terms of vectors, where instead of having three numbers that are orderly like x, y, and z, the coordinates,
Hmm.
you have, instead of three, you have n numbers, where n could
Right.
even be
Yeah.
infinite. But is an extension, is an abstraction, but an abstraction
Yes.
that has no mental, no picture in the mind. I don't have a picture of the mind, even of of a hypercube in four dimensions. Never mind an hypercube in 200 dimensions. or an
Right.
hypersphere in 200 dimensions. It's just impossible. I don't think that
Yeah.
anybody has, that I know of. Even the most uh, you know accomplished mathematician. You just it goes beyond the capacity of the mind to visualize.
Right.
So we have to live with the abstraction. But the abstraction
Yes.
has certain properties, and you can actually say that is a accurate representation of a quantum state because of the consequences of that. Um, the point, though, is that the representation of qualia is not the experience of qualia. See, that's where
Right.
most people don't understand, because most people think that the theory of reality is reality. No, the theory of reality is not reality. The theory of reality is a description, at best, of a reality that can only be lived. It can only be,
Yeah.
and especially when you go to consciousness, the theory of the representation of qualia can only be known by the field which is in that state, and it can only be known as sensations and feelings. There are no numbers. The sensations and feelings are not numbers. Where symbols, particles in space and time, can be represented more accurately by numbers, but qualia can only be represented by probability amplitudes, and that's it for right now. And so the representation of qualia is not qualia. We go beyond qualia, because qualia are simply the the uh, the
Felt
the,
experience
the no
of
the bringers of meaning. Cioè, we actually get
sure. Okay.
meaning out of qualia. The love that I feel is a feeling. It's the feeling of love that has depth,
Yeah.
is dynamic, and so on, right? But what is the meaning of that love? That the meaning of the love in that moment in which I love a person is something that is a sort of the essence of the qualia, is the essence of the
Yes.
qualia. And so there is a transformation from qualia to meaning, which is what I call comprehension. So comprehension is the ability that the field has. Now it goes beyond math, the math that we know. There may be some
Hmm.
math in the future that may help this transformation, but for now, it was beyond the math. The math that we have, which is stops at the quantum fields, which require Hilbert spaces, n-dimensional complex spaces, they're called Hilbert spaces. Uh, that math stops there. That's as far as we go. But 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 the interiority of nature, the interiority of the field, is able to extract, not only to perceive qualia and have sensations and feelings out of it, but also to comprehend them and transform it into meaning. And the symbols that we use are actually symbols that are trying to represent the meaning of the qualia, not the qualia so much, what it means.
Right.
So it's very interesting here, because the qualia would require such an elaborate representation, but we go to the meaning. It's much simpler, and only if another person has is a similar meaning, then the symbol can
Yeah.
understood. That's why, for example, if I say a direct experience of consciousness to someone that never had a direct experience of consciousness, I can write a book about it. It's still the person that didn't have that experience don't understand it, because the meaning of that phrase of those symbols are can only be gotten if you had a direct experience of consciousness, independent of the qualia that were in that direct experience of consciousness, you see.
Yes. Yes. So there's this raw state of experience that is it's pre everything essentially, and we tap into that raw state of experience
Yeah,
through qualia, essentially. Through,
yeah,
I guess we never defined qualia, through a direct experience of some kind of subjective factor. You use the example of love, the smell of something, the taste of something, and this is really a core sticking point of the hard problem of consciousness. That if anybody's looked into this, they've heard of this before. That
Yeah,
there's this place where, you know, if you're a hardcore materialist neuroscience scientist, you believe that it's possible to explain any subjective experience through something empirical going on in the brain. But then, to your point that we started bringing up before, philosophers like Chalmers come along and they say, well, hold on a second. There's a big explanatory gap between the electrical activity that you're measuring, or the, brain networks or brain architecture that you're talking about, and that rich subjective experience that someone is having. And
yeah.
yes, there is a relationship, there's a correlation there, but to ascribe causality to the brain, having a little light show, there's a lot there that we have not yet explained. So maybe it would bring some clarity to discuss why that can't be done, why it is that you can't just take a measurement of the brain and then extrapolate that into a subjective experience. Because uh, very simple devil's advocate, right? Like, well, if I give you um 20 milligrams of Adderall, right,
Hmm.
i can make I can alter your subjective experience. I can make all of these physiological things happen to you. I can make all of these, I can make your thoughts race. I can make you sweat. I can make you, um, so isn't that just a reductionist prescription there? What's missing?
Well, there is a fundamental difference between the signals in the brain, which are classical information, and the quantum state, which is quantum information. It's quantum bits that are entangled. And let's not get to the entanglement until later, perhaps.
Okay,
But
okay. Sure.
because it's already complicated as it is. But so the quantum state cannot be reproduced. Cannot, so you cannot measure it. When you measure a quantum state, you at most you can get 1 bit per quantum bit. So the state itself can only be known, if it can be known at all, by the field itself that is in that state. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It is impossible to know the entanglement of these quantum bits. That is impossible, unless you have just a couple of quantum bits. But that's silly. I mean, anything real, anything that matters is gazillions of quantum bits.
Hmm.
For example, a living cell is gazillions of quantum bits to describe it. So you cannot classical computers don't are useless because you cannot know the state. You cannot measure it. And but that's another problem, that we have always looked at cells if they were classical systems. No, they're quantum and classical. So going back, without going by the tangent this time, if we if we think in those terms, then uh, the classical representation of a quantum state can only express a very small portion of what is the knowing and the feeling of the field of the state. and
Right.
and so that is exactly why you need quantum physics. And so if you have consciousness, you have to have this distinction between what is the inner experience, which is much richer than what can be said about that experience.
Hmm.
And by the way, here i
Right.
cannot i cannot not mention here that the Tao Te Ching starts with the verse:
Yes.
the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So
Yes.
the Tao that can be told is like the quantum state of a field that cannot be told. It can only be known from the inside, you know. And if you whatever you say is I'm very small part of what it is, of what you know from the inside.
Yeah.
And that's
So
2,500
in my
years old.
Adderall,
Yeah.
right. Yes, yes. I love that line. And I think about it often. I think about that opening to the Tao Te Ching often. But so in this case of my random example of giving someone an amphetamine, right? And saying, well, this amphetamine can make you have this experience and have, these various
Well,
panoply
you're
of
screwing
physical.
up the working of the brain in in ways that we don't know, and so those signals produce qualia within the field that are
Yes.
whatever maybe chaotic or maybe non-chaotic, but it's a different experience that is generated within the ego consciousness of the entity that controls that body. So
Hmm. Sorry, I was just going to say to plug that into to the opening of the Tao Te Ching. Um, I could measure your heart rate. I could uh, measure your body heat. I could um, look at the electrical signals in your brain, all of these things. But it's still, those elements of the Tao that can be named are not the experience still of the entity experiencing the reality of that Adderall interacting with their physiology and their neurology and their psychology. All of that is this totality that cannot be measured by classical processes, right?
absolutely, that's right. And that's exactly also why scientists do not understand quantum physics, because they have not connected the dots. The dots are telling you that quantum physics represents the interiority of nature, not the exteriority of nature. It represents what the best that can be known about what going known from the point of view, a theoretical point of view, of what goes on within
Hmm.
nature, not without nature. And the best, but it can be known by the field themselves, can know their own state, because we know the state. We know that when we feel love, also we cannot express what we feel. We use words or we use gesture, we caress, whatever. It's not enough. It doesn't tell what we feel. It comes close. It comes close to telling enough about what we feel, but this is not what we feel. What we feel is in a sense we cannot do that, and that's why we need classical symbols in order to communicate and be able to, through repeated communication, be able to explain much better what we feel. But we cannot do it in one shot. We have to have a discourse. We have to interact as fields with classical symbols, what I call live information, because the class even the classical symbols, which are the ones that we computed, is not live information. Live information is something which is between the quantum fields and the classical bits, the classical symbols. Is atoms and molecules that interact quantumly in space and time. Atoms and molecules,
Hmm.
particles that interact quantumly in space and time. They follow rules that are in between the quantum states and classical physics. And so there is a and
Yeah.
and if you study a cell as an informational system, we have to use that type of information. And we do not have computers that allow you to do simulations of these things, because these things behave behave quantumly. And so there is the collapse of the wave function. There are events that cannot be predictable, that are not predictable. So it cannot be studied just with classical computers. We need to go
Yeah.
beyond what we know right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So this starts to get into why free will is a core part of your theory as well. And this
That's right.
idea that not only are we fields, that have some level of free will, all of these fields have some level of free will. And this gets into why reality is not random, right? Because I mean, quantum physics is so, to your point already, it is so incredibly complicated that it appears to be random. Like we cannot, through classical study of these systems, ascertain any algorithmic sort of predictor of how these complex quantum systems are going to act, right? but
Yeah,
but your contention is that although it is incredibly complex and appears random, you know what else looks like randomness is free will, because you have a will that is actually somehow selecting,
yeah.
somehow creating coherence, making decisions. And this is true all the way to the deepest levels of reality, according to your theory, right? This isn't something that emerges, with people walking around on the planet in meat suits. This is something, this free will is built into the fabric of reality somehow.
Absolutely. You know, from the outside, it looks random. But from the inside, a free will decision is a free will decision. So the field that is observed is the one that has the free will. By the way, it's not the consciousness of the observer, like in the past, people that thought consciousness was collapsed to the wave function were thinking, you know, they were thinking that the consciousness of the observer is collapsing the wave function. No, no, no. This theory says that the field, the observed, what is observed is the one you observe electrons. The field of electron is the one that decides which electron will show up in that detector in that place in which it shows up. All you can
Mhm.
calculate from the quantum physics is the probability in all the places that it could show up, but it will not tell you physics where it will show up. From the outside, it looks like random, a random choice. In fact, a random event, but from the inside is a free will decision. So the field that makes that decision knows exactly after he made the decision where it's going to show up that electron. You see, very different thing.
Yeah.
But that, of course, can only be true if the field is conscious. And since scientists, physicists had never thought that consciousness was a fundamental property of nature, then they couldn't interpret the collapse of the wave function as a free will decision of the observed. They simply said, we don't understand the collapse of the wave function because it's random. Pure randomness is not even algorithmic because they have determined that based on on the way on the probabilities, based on the entanglement, the properties of entanglement. So it is a pure random event that cannot be explained in any way other than a free will decision. But that is not acceptable
Mhm.
if the field is not conscious, because what does it mean to have free will if you're not conscious? In other words, the field must
Right.
know what it wants in order to make a free will decision. It must know what is
Mhm.
after, right? And that's therefore once you have shown that the field can be conscious, which is the fact that the property of the uh, pure quantum state are exactly the property of an inner experience, non-reproducible, and you can only know the no cloning theorem. You can only know 1 bit per quantum bit, which is Olivos theorem. Those two properties that are unexplainable, but we had to live with it. After you've done that, then you can explain collapse of the wave function as a free will decision of the observer. So now the mystery of quantum physics are solved by simply accepting that from the very beginning, these fields are conscious and have free will, which is the postulate.
Hmm. It's so in my mind, this points to why we live in a coherent reality. It explains things that physicists would struggle with, right? Like, particularly physicists who don't want to believe in any level of teleology, or, you know, something that looks a lot like, you know, an entity or a god or whatever, in that, so something like fine tuning, for instance, it looks like, wow, that everything at the very genesis point, at the very early stages of the development of the universe, was just right. The exact perfect constants emerged. All of the laws of physics emerged just the way they needed to. And if I'm understanding what you're proposing correctly, Well, of course it looks like that because everything was essentially a conscious decision all throughout the evolution of the cosmos.
Yeah. In this model, creativity comes from two things. One is free will decisions. It's not randomness, like science explains creativity through randomness or
Mm.
random variation and selection. Randomness is the creative agent of science today. Not so. The fields want to know themselves because they are emanation of one, like one that wants to know itself. One knows itself through the fields that know themselves. So the fields wants to know themselves. They are communicating to each other what their own knowing, and the self-knowing grows and evolves in time. And so the creativity is based on the free will decisions and the comprehension of these fields. And so now the evolution over a sudden is meaningful because it comes from the self-knowing of the fields, which is the self-knowing of one.
Mm.
And randomness is no longer necessary. Randomness is what we call what we don't understand, what we don't, what we don't, we don't understand it, because so we attribute to randomness that lack of
Yeah,
understanding, like we attribute, junk DNA is what we don't understand. Come on, junk
exactly.
DNA
Yeah, yeah,
is 98% of how can a cell carry with it 98% of the stuff that it has as junk? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but we had to say it that way because we don't understand it. And we think that we don't understand is random. Well, the randomness of the collapse of the wave function is in fact free will decisions of the fields that are observed, but they in fact are interacting with each other. The observer is independent of the interaction of the fields. You see,
hmm yeah,
the observer, the field that interacts with the other field, those are both, they are observer, observed, and agents. So a field is all
yeah,
three, and they exchange role. So when I communicate with the field, then I am the I am the observer and the agent, and then the other is and the other is the observed to me, and then we exchange roles. And so the communication goes from quantum to classical to quantum, and we keep on going around. And through that process, the fields know themselves and know the others like themselves.
yeah, yeah. It feels. I already mentioned Platonism a couple of times, but a lot of this feels very Platonic in sort of with kind of updated terminology that obviously didn't exist back then. Like these concepts of like there being a quantum reality and there being these quantum fields that give rise to like physical agents isn't quite wording that they had access to, but essentially they were positing something very similar that you could basically replace what you're saying with us being the expression of a field with us being an expression of a soul, right? An immaterial soul that is doing something, learning about itself through manifesting a physical body. um I mean that's not quite the exact metaphysical picture painted by Platonists, because there are other intermediary factors, but it's very similar. Has have you personally been influenced by Platonism at all, or is it just a similarity that you arrive to independently?
No, there's similarity that arrive independently, but also to be specific, for example, the Platonic realm of
Yeah.
forms, which many
Hmm.
mathematicians subscribe to, as to explain that the laws of physics, in a way, exist independently from reality, or they
Yeah.
exist before even reality. Therefore, they have the status of God, really. The laws of physics are God. Don't make any sense here. The laws of physics are actually the laws of the symbols that have to be that have evolved over time, over eons, as the fields communicate with each other. This There are like the syntactical rule of a language. And the syntactical rule of a language, all the fields must follow because they want to be understood. So they have to follow the rules of the syntax, which is the laws of symbols. The symbol, which is what you can measure in space and time. You see, so all of a sudden you understand also why there must be laws. But those laws have to have evolved with the self-knowing of the fields, which is the self-knowing of one.
Hmm.
So
So so
all
broadly,
of a sudden,
yeah.
in this view, it is the conscious comprehension of the deities that created the laws, which then we are discovering with our consciousness, with our capacity to understand, and we then codify the laws that are explaining what we observe. Is not that the laws exist before us. The laws are a creation and are induced by the need to communicate. And to communicate, we have to have symbolic rules that we all adhere to. But we adhere to those willfully because we want to communicate. So it's not that we are imposed that we have to obey these laws. We adhere to these laws because we want to communicate. We want to know each other. We want to, we have to follow the rules of of the language. If now I wanted to create my own laws of language, you and I couldn't communicate. So I had to follow the meaning of the words we have established, and how this meaning can combine into sentences that make sense to both you and I. So those are the laws of
Yeah.
physics. In other words, those are, this is a metaphor, but it's a pretty strong
Yeah.
metaphor that in order to communicate, we need to follow rules, and the rules are we have created through our own, evolution of the languages, with which we communicate, which are, at the very beginning, they are the languages of the elementary particles, because the elementary fields communicate with elementary particles. And the law of there are the fundamental laws that are the fundamental fields. Those laws are essentially universal laws because everybody has to understand those symbols. Matter of fact, electrons are the same everywhere in the universe. The words that we use right now, they're only valid for the language that we both speak and we have learned. That the same laws are not valid if I were to speak in Italian or in Japanese. So I have to change the meaning of the words, the sounds, and so on. But no matter which language you're going to speak, you still have to follow the rules in order to be understood. So there are, you know, but the laws of physics are the basic laws of physics, are the laws of the lowest level universal language
Hmm.
that the early, the fundamental scientists had to communicate with.
Hmm. I'm gonna have to chew on that for
Yep,
a while. This
that's
relationship
fine.
between so what I if I'm understanding correctly, and tell me if I've missed something here, is you're saying what appears to look like thing like universal laws of physics is really just what it looks like trying to explain from our classical perspective something that's actually occurring on the conscious level of a field that has made a decision that we now sort of have to reverse engineer using our own language, mathematics, classical perspective. And it's not that that law really exists somewhere. That's just what it looks like from the inside out, trying to reverse engineer a conscious decision made by like a quantum field that is conscious that's really everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Yes, I mean, yes, and I mean, it is a little more nuanced, but yes.
Okay.
In other words, the early particles communicating with each other, the electron
Hmm.
communicating with the protons and so on. For example, eventually they reach a common understanding, and that common understanding al- allows a new field to emerge, which is the field of atoms of hydrogens. And the atoms of hydrogens
Mm,
now have have rules, and they are they are combined with the rules and now appear like the Schrodinger equation can explain. You see, but those rules have created now atoms of hydrogen with properties which are creative. They are completely different than the sum of the properties of the electron, the sum of the properties of the proton, because the property of electrons is a are very creative, but they are the result of this combined comprehension of those two fields that have led to a new field to emerge. So now the atom of hydrogens have their own way to interact with the other atoms of hydrogen, with other atoms of helium or what have you, and you have new sets
mhm,
of laws again that they are the laws that the symbols follow, but they are interpreted as meaning by the fields. And so
mm,
and how where is the space is fundamental here, because the structure, the three-dimensional structure of these symbols are important in determining the meaning of this of different meaning that these fields communicate with each other. So because the symbol, the basic symbol of electron is just the field of the electrons are all the same. They all the same kind of they are indistinguishable, but their position can be different. They can be entangled. They have properties in common that are actually within the field itself,
mhm,
knowable only by the field that creates them. So there is all it's all to be discovered now. I mean, if you begin to think in these terms, space itself now has a completely different sense of what we normally have thought about space. Space is really the environment where the memory of the experience, and also the symbols that are communicated, exist. And so if you start by saying that one wants to know itself, space, time, matter, and energy must be described in terms of what comprehension is, of what meaning is.
mm,
And so no longer as given, physical givens, because the deepest reality is the reality of meaning. So that also says that there will be all kinds of new mathematics that needs to be discovered in order to then represent meaning and symbols in this context of the self-knowing of one.
mm. Yeah, that self-knowing of one seems to be the sort of beginning and end, in a sense, of your theory, and it's one that I'm glad it's so simple, because so many other parts of it are really difficult to wrap your mind around.
Yes,
But I wonder.
yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I can get my mind around this idea that all of us are a manifestation of something that is trying to know itself. But then there's also something that is, like you refer to the human being as really fundamentally this field, this conscious field that is somehow knowing itself through a body, through doing something here in classical space. But if there is this thing that is like this field of subjectivity that is existing in some realm that we can scarcely even begin to imagine, through the way we normally think about the world, what it is, that thing evolving, or is that thing already as complex as it can possibly be, given the fact that it is this just incredibly complex, and I don't know, it's hard to imagine like what that thing could be doing to know itself more,
Yeah,
if
well,
that question makes sense.
yeah. No, it makes sense. In this view, there are three levels of reality. There is the deepest reality, is the reality of meaning, the reality of comprehension, the reality of qualia, that part that is pointed at by the quantum states of quantum physics, these n-dimensional
Hmm.
vectors, okay, that represent the probability amplitudes. So this reality, but in physics, this is considered just a mathematical exercise. It's not given any realities. It's a mathematical exercise that allows us then to compute what we can measure in space and time. But I give to that because that is actually what explains why we have to have consciousness and free will is in that reality. And that reality now can be connected with the classical reality, which is the reality of objects in space and time, by living organism that straddles the two realities. They are quantum and classical.
Hmm.
Living organisms are not classical
Hmm.
systems. They are not computers. Every cell of my body contains the genome of the egg that created the entire body. So even our human body is holographic, meaning that all the cells of my body, I have 50 trillions of them, are parts whole of the organism. They have the potential knowledge of the whole inside each of the parts, like the field of electrons, the field of protons, the field of hydrogens. They are parts whole of one. They have the potential of one to know itself, and they can filiate other fields. And so this capacity is the same way that we have our body built. In other words, we a cell can later on in life express aspects of itself that were not expressed at its birth. And this is what epigenetics is now discovered. And
Hmm.
30 years ago, epigenetics was forbidden. It was just, are you crazy? There is no epigenetics. Well, now, we see that there is epigenetics. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the DNA must be junk for 80 98.5%. The rest, only the coding DNA is what makes sense. Everything else is garbage. Well, no, now we're beginning to find, treasures into the junk DNA, like CRISPR-Cas9, for example, and all those kind of things. They're
Hmm.
now,
Hmm.
revolutionizing biology. So many of the crazies of the past now have become the jewels of the future, after we stop thinking that what we don't know must not exist, or must be random, or must be whatever. So it's time to wake up. The reality is much deeper and much richer than what we have imagined to be. So we are built an image. Even the body is built an image and likeness of the fields. But the computer is not. The computer is made of transistors. The parts of a computer are switches. A switch knows nothing about the totality of the computer, never mind of the software that runs
Yeah.
in the computer. So, and it will never change. It will always be a switch. If the switch wanted to change function, as in its life, the computer will stop working. So, the switch better be a switch forever. So you see the difference, but now it's fashionable to say that biology is just like like computers, with using
Yeah.
wetware instead of silicon. Wow, what an idea! That is, as far as I'm concerned, that's BS. Frankly, very deep
Yeah.
BS. Means not understanding what biology is doing, and not understanding the reality of biology is quantum and classical, and it must be studied with new tools that we now don't yet have. So, so the body then becomes a bridge between the classical reality on one end and the deeper reality, the reality of classical symbols, the symbols that are like written words, and the symbols, not the symbols, the meaning which is within the field, which is represented only by the quantum state. Only represented, because it can only be known by the consciousness of the fields. Can only be known by the
Yeah.
consciousness of the field. The body doesn't know anything. The knowing is only in the field, not in the body. And when the body dies, the field doesn't go anywhere because it have always been there. So when the body dies, who we are continues to exist.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that and how you conceive of death and what you think it is and what kind of a state it leads to, or if it leads to another body manifesting in some kind of reincarnation or something. But I do want to pause on this really important point, which is this idea of consciousness emerging, obviously, from any kind of artificial system or um, piece of hardware combined with software. And this also gets into, a lot of people, and I play with this language a lot. This language of um, simulation, this language of matrix. But for the same reasons you're pointing out and more, that a computer cannot be consciousness, I don't think we live in any kind of simulation or any kind of matrix in that sense. But I think that we do live in some kind of a false perception of reality, in the same way that you've been pointing out throughout this conversation. That if you think reality is really just this classical system that we're going to like, that is self-contained, and all the questions can be answered just from the inside out by examining the physical bits, like, no, I don't think that you're going to get a full picture of reality whatsoever through doing that kind of investigation. But yeah, that's one of the things that, I mean, just to bitch and complain for a second, that's one of the things that has always bothered me about Bostrom's whole simulation hypothesis, is because it's like the reductionist physicalist explanation of consciousness on steroids. It's like
Yeah.
saying not only can you get consciousness from, really complex, properly arranged bits of matter, you can get an entire reality filled with conscious beings that aren't even real conscious beings, that are all just, you know, um, automatons that became self-aware through some kind of really advanced computing system that we're going to eventually build if we just keep making more and more complex computer systems. Um, and I'd love to hear you riff on that
Well,
more.
it's
Like,
very simple. It's very simple.
yeah.
The we know that our experience, we are the only one to have that experience. We cannot um, transfer the experience. The qualia cannot be that cannot be transferred. Never mind the meaning, which is the essence of qualia, through comprehension.
Hmm.
So, you know, just like the quantum state is the only mathematical representation that can represent qualia. Okay, and the quantum state cannot be copied. The program of a computer, the data of a computer, can be copied exactly. So already you see that a computer can never be conscious, because if it was conscious, you could make a copy of it exactly, and dump it in another computer. That is not the case with us, because the consciousness cannot be reproduced. The experience cannot be reproduced. And free will, of course. I mean, most scientists don't even believe that there is free
Right.
will in the universe. Never mind, in a
Hmm.
computer. The computer, you don't want free will in a computer. I mean, God forbid that the computer decides to not respond to your queries, or do what you want, right? So you don't want free will. So what is consciousness useful for if there is no free will? Just think about it. It would be useless. And that's why within the this you know uh, way of thinking, this I call it scientism. I call it scientism
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it is scientism way of thinking. That if there is only matter and there is only something that can be reproduced by a computer, can be simulated by a computer, there cannot be free will. And so consciousness could not be useful, because consciousness, what does it mean? Knowing, you cannot even define what it means to have an intention. There is no intention, because intention requires consciousness, self-consciousness, to know that you have an intention. So there is no intention, there is no comprehension, because you start with, to have comprehension, you have to start with, at least with qualia, with some sort of understanding that is
Yeah.
in some interiority. So consciousness and free will must not exist, which is exactly what happens in a computer. There is no consciousness, there is no free will, and there will never be consciousness and free will in a computer, in a classical computer. In a quantum computers, the quantum computers that we build today, they are deterministic. The algorithm is deterministic, meaning they do not have free will. So the computer itself is not does not have free will, does not have a conscious experience, the computer, but there is associated with the computer, while the computer is in a pure quantum state and it does the operation, there is associated to that computer a consciousness that is in the deeper reality, but is not directed
Mm.
by anybody. And then that consciousness, is only exists during the quantum computation, between
Mm.
you start the state, and then you do the query, you do the measurement. So in that period of time, there is a conscious state in the deeper reality, but the computer cannot do anything about it. It cannot use it. The computer itself is not conscious. Okay. Very, just like we are not conscious. I mean, our body is not conscious either. And we are a quantum classical computer. But a consciousness is in the field that has free will and controls the body with free will and the consciousness that he has.
I follow. Yes, I follow that. I was just gonna say it's like, so on some level we're creating some like a, you know little quantum daimon or something, to like a and I don't mean daimon in the computer science sense. I mean like in the platonic sense, like there's like this some kind of little uh self-awareness that's, I don't even know if
Yeah,
self-awareness is the right word, but
it's like
consciousness that's,
a little
yeah,
cloud of self awareness. No, of awareness without
yeah,
self
yeah,
awareness, of awareness, because
yeah.
the only self awareness allow you to have free will. In other words,
Hmm.
you must understand that the conscious experience that you are having is your conscious experience, and therefore you can
Right.
do something about it. That requires a double, you have to be aware that you are aware, in a way, right? You have to have self-reflect, and that only then can you have free will. Otherwise there is no free will if you don't know that it is you that is conscious, and you also understand what you want. Then you can use free will. So free will is foundational. That's why ideas that there is no free will are meaningless. Now, you may not speak of free will of one, because one, the free will of one is the will of one. I mean, there is only one. But its creations must have free will. Otherwise, they wouldn't. They could
Yeah.
not direct their own experience. They could not communicate with each other. So that's where I have a difficulty with a type of idealism that only considers one field of consciousness, period. There is only
Yeah.
one consciousness.
Yeah.
No, there have to be one consciousness that create other consciousness, other fields that are conscious, and then these fields must be communicating, and those fields must have free will and consciousness in order
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
know
that
themselves.
that's like Kastrup's contention, right? Kastrup sort of says
Yeah,
that there's
yeah,
no free will
yeah.
because there's
Bernardo
only
thinks
one
that there is
will.
only
Yeah.
one consciousness. And so within that, that conception, then clearly free will makes no sense, because one is one. It does whatever it wants. It doesn't. It has no meaning. Free will. But that reality cannot explain what is going on in the universe. I mean, it doesn't. It stops there. Then it's just like God does everything that He wants, and so big. Okay, that's done. We are done. We cannot.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
basically that defines essentially a deterministic universe, which is not what quantum physics is saying. There is no determinism. It is
Mhm.
well established. There is a fundamental indeterminism in quantum physics that must be dealt with.
Yeah, yeah. I think I have trouble wrapping my mind around that too. It really does seem, and I mean, not that the way things seem from my POV is a good way to ascertain what the deeper realities are, but it does seem like we live in an ecosystem of entities that have some modicum of free will that they're expressing and processes that are working themselves out. I would definitely agree. Um, so I want to return to that question earlier about this in your view, this idea that we when we die we go back into this more this internal sense of self that is the truer sort of state of this field that we are an expression of. What does that state look like to you, and then does is there some kind of new process that starts occurring? Is there a another um physical manifestation you think that would emerge naturally after this one? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts are that base. First of all, I, I did not. I have not had a near-death experience myself, so I cannot
Yes.
attest to any kind of, you know, any kind of knowledge that is direct of that. But I've read many accounts, and so and they make sense to me in this context that basically, since consciousness becomes what it experiences, we are so focused on the stuff in the information produced by the body that observes this classical
Hmm.
reality in front of itself. So we look on the other side of a filter, and the information created by these cells, but inside the cells, because that's where the communication is between the field and the physical body. So we only pay attention to certain symbols that the body produces, and we think that that's reality. So we are captivated by that. We think that that's all there is. But we know that if the body had different sensory systems, it would see stuff that we don't see right now here. For example, if I had cell phones instead of eyes, where I see nothing, that there are thousands of conversations going on right now that I could, that I could listen in if I had different sensory system. Okay, so we think that reality is what we observe with the body, but that's a tiny portion of what is actually here.
Right.
And the body is a filter that filters out most of what's here in space and time, and we think that that's reality. Now, by being captivated, it's like when you play a video game, and as a
Hmm.
kid or even as an adult, and you forget that it's time for dinner because you get lost in the game that you're playing. But then if somebody
Hmm.
comes in and turns off your video game, you turn around and say, "Oh my God, yeah, I thought that was that avatar that I was controlling," and
Yeah.
now you look around and say, "Oh my God, there is a lot more around me than I thought that it was." So this capacity of consciousness to expand and concentrate, expand its field of view, its attention span, and sort of becoming what it experiences. This capacity that allowed me, for example, to perceive myself as a point at the bottom of my sternum. I mean, one point of light. How can it can concentrate
Yeah.
or being my experience being in the trees in front of me, is in the houses that in front of me, or lift the body. I mean, this mobility of consciousness, having expressed that, then I have no trouble, relating to the experiences of out of body, where where the body doesn't seem to produce any more, signals that the ego was used to see, sees itself over the body, and look down and
Hmm.
sees itself in an operating table, and the doctors doing what they do to reanimate this clinically dead person, and then they move into another reality, which is even more crazy in a sense, and they meet people that were already dead, and they have a unbelievable sense of being at home, joy and love with each
Mhm.
other, and so on. And then they are told to go back, right? And they enter the
Yeah.
body back again, and they say, "Oh my God, yeah, well, too bad that that we couldn't stay up there." But the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of experiences like this that are, and at least 90% of them are actually transformative experiences for the people that have them,
Mhm.
just like my experience of awakening was transformative for me, would indicate that this is real stuff. And so I don't have trouble thinking that when, if I were to die, that I would find the same thing. I would actually, but having already been awakened, I would probably, I would not even be surprised. I mean, I simply, okay, now, okay, I'm out of my body, it's great, and now I go, I go into this other reality, and I will probably, remember things that while in body I could not remember, like past lives, for example, or meeting people that I've never met in this life, and on it goes. So reconnect with the vaster consciousness, the vaster field that I am, that was, reduced quite dramatically by thinking that I was the body through my life. Though now I don't have this strong reduction. I had it before the awakening experience. Now I do not. Now for me is it's actually, I'm looking forward to when I will be in that vaster environment, and
Mhm.
and have a sense of who I am that will be expanded, but it will not negate what I am now. I will simply see more of myself, and that's it. So that's the best that I can think of it. But frankly,
Yeah.
to me, it's you know, I accept this game that we're playing here, and so that I'm going to do my best while I'm here to do what I think is I came here to do, and when I go, that's great. I don't have a fear
Mhm.
of death. After that first experience, that fear of death and the sense of being, of being mortal is gone, because once you perceive yourself as the universe that observes itself, I mean, why would I die? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It makes so much sense to me. And forgive me for bringing up Platonism yet again, but I wanted to bring this up at some point in the conversation too, because you mentioned in Silicon that your father actually did a full translation of Plotinus's Enneads.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the things that Plotinus is most well known for is this, what he called like the undescended self, right? That
Mhm.
while you're in this incarnation, this physical manifestation of selfhood, it is entirely possible to also have an experience of that truer, higher self that
Yeah.
is undescended, as he called it. And he even expresses like confusion about being able to return to that state, but also still be in this state when he, concludes his meditation of being like in nous, or like
Mhm.
the noetic realm, or whatever. And what you're saying reminds me so much of that, like this idea that we're in at least two kinds of realities at a time, but it's also not actually dualistic. It's actually, it appears it's like some kind of a dual aspect monism or something like that, um, maybe. But yeah, this again really reminds me of that.
Well, what I'm first of all, I have a sort of a, um, um, I'm not into isms myself, frankly, because
Yeah, yeah,
because
I
because
understand. I understand.
yeah, because my, what am I have arrived at this kind of theory from my knowledge of physics, and from the knowledge of direct experiences of consciousness, that I was trying to explain in a sort of a theory that was connecting quantum
Yeah.
physics, classical physics, to what I have experienced. And so, for example, I have only read few pages of the, of Enneads or Plotinus that my
Oh
father
wow.
translated. So, and I found,
Wow.
one, and oh my God, I didn't know that Plotinus used the word one, because I read one from other things that I read,
Hmm.
so that, mostly they were esoteric kind of books, and or things about I don't know if the Vedas use the word one, but in some Eastern philosophy there was the concept of
Yeah.
one. So it seemed the best word to use for me, but not because I read it in Plotinus that actually used the word one. And so when I read it, I said, "Wow." My father would understand me, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, my father is long gone. He died in '95, and I was just beginning to kind of understanding what had happened to me, and so I was not unable to profit of his wisdom and his in what he had found himself. So
Well, I do wonder now with your theory so healthily outlined. I do wonder what you would think reading the Enneads now, because to me there are so many overlaps. But I also don't want to just foist my own interests onto yours and try to like make the pieces fit, because I'm definitely that kind of a person. I've heard, I forget who said this, but somebody said there's two kinds of people. There's lumpers and splitters, and lumpers want to always be like, look how all of this fits together, and then splitters
yeah,
want to be like, no, this is you can't. You've got to split them apart and understand things
yeah.
on their own terms. Um, but yes, I'm definitely much more of a lumper, and I'm always looking for the sort of perennial philosophy way to make everything fit together. And there's a lot of that, I think, in your thinking. And it sounds like you just arrived at it by really going through the process yourself, not by seeking to do that. So
And by,
that's
by
like that's
stitching
extra
together
interesting to me.
things and things that I experienced and things that I read here and there, but without ever trying to you know copy any
Yeah.
particular line of thinking, because I was trying to explain what happened to me, and there
Mhm.
was nothing that I read that would fit, that would fill, never mind even perfectly, that would fit enough of what I had experienced to be able to serve as a strong model. And in fact that's why, and also I had the help of Dariano, Professor Dariano, who
Mhm.
when it took me a while to have him understand my framework, but once he understood it, he said, "Wow, those two theorems of quantum information actually could help explain what you're talking about." And so out of that came this theory, where now there is a concrete evidence that quantum physics has exactly the properties that describe consciousness and free will. But consciousness and free will must exist before quantum physics. Quantum physics is there because it reflects the foundational properties of one. You see, because consciousness and free
Mhm.
will cannot be explained with anything that doesn't have those properties. How can you explain free will with something that doesn't have free will? It
Yeah.
cannot. And if you don't have free will, consciousness by itself is not good. It doesn't do you any good. So you need both.
Yeah.
And just that alone can tell you that any kind of theory that wants to explain consciousness and free will with quantum physics. And by the way, I was trying to do that simultaneously with also saying we must take consciousness and free will as
Mhm.
postulates, but I was still kind of figuring it out myself. And it was in the last year that I said, no, I need to turn it around. I need to explain. I need to start with the postulate that now I call it the postulate of being, and start with that postulate, and then explain quantum physics and classical physics with this postulate, which is, of course, what you want with postulates. Postulates must
Mhm.
explain theorems out of it. What you have to start with a postulate in order to explain the finer points of something. And you
Yeah.
cannot explain quantum consciousness with quantum physics, because you can say, well, there is a correlation there, but then some people will say, well, but then it could correlate with something else. So you cannot say that quantum physics you know begets consciousness. And in fact, they are right. It is consciousness that begets quantum physics.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have
I
to
follow
start
you there.
there.
I follow you
But you have
there.
to
Yeah.
start there.
Yeah.
And most people, continues to claim that consciousness is an emergent property or what have you of the brain or what have you of some classical system. But they cannot explain in any way how you can have a conscious experience that way. So you know if they are true to the science, they should be able to have a mechanism that explains that, and there is none. I tried for 3 years to
Yeah.
program a computer to be conscious. It's impossible, impossible. So at least I try. I'm not
Mm.
saying that it wasn't an emergent property of something, and hiding behind the idea of emergence, which requires emergence, requires some randomness, requires this mindset, which is already hasn't understood that creativity can only be a quantum phenomenon, because in classical physics the whole is just the sum of the parts. That's it. In classical physics, the whole is the sum of the parts. You cannot get more
Yeah.
than the sum of the parts, and so you cannot have any emergent property. The fact that the atom of hydrogen is so much more than the sum of the parts, which is the electron and the proton, is because you're talking about quantum systems. You're not talking about classical systems. And chemistry is all about, and biochemistry is all about quantum properties, not classical properties. You see, so this
Yeah.
emergentism that becomes a way to explain what you don't know and you don't understand is really baloney as far as I'm concerned, because it's time to
Mm.
stop this, giving names to something that you don't understand.
Yeah.
and I'm getting and I'm
Federico,
getting excited
no,
about
no, I
it.
that's no, and I'm glad you are, and I'm so grateful for this work you're doing, and you have really, truly, thoroughly melted my brain. I tried to do as much groundwork as I could before talking to you, but there's still elements of this conversation I'm going to have to go over multiple times, I think, to really try to grok them. And when I do, I would love to have you back on sometime, because there's so much stuff I wanted to ask you about that I didn't even get to. But I think this is a good as place of any to wrap this one up.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got two books out.
Yeah,
What else? What else do you want to tell people
I
about?
have a third book that is just came out in Italian a couple months ago.
Oh wow.
The title is Beyond the Invisible, where where science and spirituality merge. So this is the title. The subtitle is Where Science and Spirituality Merge, which actually is in the form of a conversation. So it's
Hmm.
easier to get to, and also it expands into the application of this stuff, not just the theory or just the thinking.
Yeah.
It's not a treatise, and so it is complementary to the book that to Irreducible, and hopefully it will be translated. I mean, I will translate it in Italian, and it will be out as soon as publishers do this stuff for me. But the point is that I continue to move on. The next step is to actually disprove, falsify or support this theory with experiments. This is now an actual scientific theory, and
Hmm.
it must go through the rigors of any scientific theory, which is you have to prove that theory. Prove you have to falsify the other theories and and support with the experiments yours, and that's what I plan to do. And then I
Oh
would
wow.
like to go
Beautiful.
beyond this theory into the how to apply it more broadly, and how to also, if it's possible, to create safe environments in which people can more easily have access to these direct experiences of consciousness. Because if you don't have it, it still remains
Right.
you know intellectual, and it doesn't grab you, because only if you have a direct experience of consciousness can you in fact then say, oh wow, now I understand it, now I get it,
Right.
you know like we were starting. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful.
so
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I
my
can't wait
pleasure.
to put this one out. And let's definitely do it again